Generally, parents expect that their care for their children will be reciprocated in the future. In the effort to protect their child from mistakes, however, a dangerous boundary can be crossed, a boundary whose crossing can result in a terrible death. On the morning of March 15, 2015, near South Whitehall, Pennsylvania, USA, a police patrol noticed a suspicious Ford Freestyle partially submerged in a pond. The officers decided to conduct a standard check. As they shone flashlights into the interior, they saw several suspicious stains that resembled blood. The doors were not locked. When they opened them, they detected a strong smell of cleaning agents. Although the interior had obviously been cleaned, it showed blood traces. The vehicle belonged to a woman named Cheryl Sylvanek. One of the officers noticed a disturbed layer of earth on the side under which a corpse emerged. The medical examiner confirmed that the deceased was Cheryl. The stab wounds extended over the entire upper body, but 5 stabs to the neck were fatal. It was a brutal attack. The victim's skull was bruised and hematomas were evident. She had been beaten for a long time before being killed with a weapon. The bleeding in her eyes and the broken bone in her neck indicated that she had been restrained. Cheryl fought desperately, as the numerous defensive injuries on her arms showed. Due to the degree of rigor mortis, the medical examiner determined that she had died several hours before the police arrived. The vehicle was partially flooded. Apparently, the perpetrator wanted to dispose of it by drowning it along with the corpse. However, this was not possible as the slope was unstable, and the vehicle simply got stuck in the mud. It seemed the perpetrator was confused and decided to bury the victim and leave the car, but this obviously did not help conceal the murder. Given the extent of the brutality, investigators immediately suspected a personal motive for the attack. The alleged perpetrator was to be sought in the immediate vicinity of the woman. When investigators arrived at Cheryl's address to inform her relatives of the discovery, they found her husband in the house, who had slept through the night and did not even realize that something terrible had happened to his wife. Also living in the house was their 14-year-old daughter, who was at that time with a 20-year-old man. The young man and the deceased's husband were immediately suspected, but the truth was even more shocking. The murdered woman was a married mother of 2 children. The husband's name was David. They had lived for 24 years in the small town of Appomattox in Pennsylvania. The family was a respected family in the area. They had similar professions. The man was a pharmacist and worked at the local pharmacy. Cheryl was an employee at the town's hospital. The couple's firstborn child was a boy who was already attending college at the time of the described events, and in 2001, a daughter was born, named Jamie. She became a real daddy's girl. The relationship with her father was from the beginning even better than with her mother. They were very close and even had a penchant for the same activities. The father and his daughter often went fishing and hunting. Both loved motorcycles. When Jamie started school, she integrated without problems into the new group. The girl was sociable and learned well. In her teenage years, a rebellious phase began, leading to frequent conflicts within the family. In particular, Jamie had many problems with her mother. All this reached a critical point at the end of 2014. During this time, the student increasingly withdrew, communicated less and less with family members, even with her father, with whom she had had a trusting and understanding relationship from the start. Jamie began regularly running away from home, refusing to say where and with whom she was spending time. All this happened with enviable regularity. Her grades at school got worse and worse. The rebellious girl even insisted on moving into a rented apartment with her friends, where she lived for several months. It was only with difficulty that the parents managed to persuade their daughter to return home. Until March 2015, Cheryl had no idea what was going on, until she finally managed to find out the reason for her daughter's sudden mood swing and behavior. As it turned out, at the time she moved in with her friends, she was already in a relationship with a man 6 years her senior. At such an age, this difference is quite significant. When the mother found out, she was naturally shocked. She knew exactly that an 8th grade student cannot be of sound mind when dating an adult man. During family confrontations, Cheryl discovered that her daughter had fallen in love with a soldier stationed in a unit in Maryland. His name was Caleb Barnes. It turned out that the young people had known each other long before these events. When Jamie was 13 years old, she attended a rock festival with friends. At the event, she met Caleb through a mutual acquaintance. The young man immediately took a liking to her. Jamie decided to enter into a relationship with him. To this end, the girl, who looked much older than she was, posed as a 17-year-old. The man then agreed to exchange numbers, and thus their communication began with the lies of a schoolgirl. They used social networks and SMS for their correspondence, often called each other, and met whenever Caleb was in town. During this time, the relationship with her family began to deteriorate, as the girl was greatly afraid of being exposed. In this case, her mother and father would naturally not allow her to communicate with an older man. However, it only happened a year later, as the young people's relationship strengthened. In early May 2015, Cheryl revealed her daughter. She had seen the secret correspondence that Jamie was conducting with Caleb. The woman now knew that they were meeting regularly. In an attempt to find out with whom the schoolgirl had established a relationship, the mother quickly discovered that it was an adult friend, and she did not like it at all. When her daughter found out that they had been exposed, she tried to lie to her mother and claimed that Caleb was only 16 years old. But Cheryl knew that he was in the military, which meant he could not be younger than 18. When the woman found out the truth about the young man's age, she was shocked about what Jamie had gotten herself into. She contacted the 20-year-old Caleb himself to talk to him. He confessed that he was convinced Jamie was 17 and would soon be 18. When Cheryl told him the truth, he pretended to be shocked, but in reality, he had known for a long time. After several months of their relationship, Jamie confessed to him her real age, and Caleb agreed to continue their affair but insisted on keeping it secret from adults. Cheryl had no idea about his deception. Caleb explained to the young man that he had to meet with a minor and therefore had to go to jail, pretending to agree to her demands. He even called Jamie and announced to her mother that they would break up. But it turned out that everything was a lie. The lovers continued their relationship but kept it even more hidden. About a week before the murder, Cheryl caught the couple in the basement of her house in bed. The woman was angry, threw Caleb out, and threatened to report him to the police because he had an intimate relationship with a minor. The exact content of this conversation could not be determined. It was probably the same episode where the mother tried to convince the older friend to end contact with the schoolgirl. She was not aware of how far things had already progressed and that her daughter was pregnant. Immediately afterward, Caleb called Jamie, and only 2 days after this conversation, the corpse was found. In the hands of the police was the corpse of a woman who tried to protect her daughter. Could two lovers have planned a brutal murder to eliminate obstacles to their happiness? Of course, they could have, as such stories are not unusual. After the police officers learned about this teenage relationship, Caleb became the main suspect in the murder case, but Jamie was also under suspicion. When investigators first arrived at Cheryl's house, they noticed scratches on the girl, which raised the suspicion that she was involved in the crime. This suspicion was only strengthened when the police met Caleb and also noticed a severe cut on his right arm. Suspicion against the young couple grew, and the investigators continued to gather information about them. In the days before the tragedy, Jamie had begged her mother to let her go to a festival in the neighboring town of Scranton. She insisted on going alone, but her mother was naturally against it because it could be dangerous. Moreover, the woman was sure that it was just an excuse to see Caleb again. The investigators analyzed all the correspondence between the young couple and Cheryl. In one of the correspondences on this topic, when the schoolgirl was in class, the mother wrote that she would not allow this relationship under any circumstances as long as the girl was a minor. Jamie assured her mother that she would go to the festival with her friends and that Caleb would not be there. The daughter tried to manipulate and threatened with a nervous breakdown or another outburst at home. Finally, she managed to get her way. The mother conceded and even agreed to take her daughter with her boyfriend. Cheryl wanted to use this trip for educational purposes to set all the fine points in young people's relationships. Immediately after the mother had given her an ultimatum, the student was angry and sent her boyfriend an SMS in which she expressed her wish for her mother to disappear forever. He laughed and agreed that this would solve all problems. From this communication, it emerged that Jamie was expecting a baby. She responded to her mother that she understood the proposal. They agreed that the woman would take the couple to a concert in a neighboring town on the evening after school. Then the girl turned to her boyfriend again, and between the two of them, there was a disturbing exchange of messages reminiscent of discussing a crime plan. Cheryl should drive the young people in a car because she did not feel like attending the event. The woman should drive off on her own and then wait in the car at the end of the festival. All three should then drive back home. The plan was that Jamie would massacre her own mother at this point. After reviewing these reports, law enforcement was sure that it was a case of two murderers. Now they had to prove it. After examining the victim's car, it was clear from the numerous blood splatters that the attack had taken place as indicated in the passenger compartment. She was beaten, strangled, and treated with numerous knife wounds, causing her to die from blood loss within minutes. According to reports, the two perpetrators then calmly went to a fast food restaurant where they ate. They then went to a nearby store where they bought cleaning agents, a lot of bleach, and latex gloves. Apparently, all this was necessary to cover up the evidence. The young people were recorded by the store's surveillance cameras. When law enforcement officers saw the footage, they were shocked. It seemed as if the schoolgirl was happier than ever and glad that her mother was no longer alive. Jamie had no remorse for the act but was rather happy that she could now date her older friend without hindrance. Jamie and her friend returned to the crime scene and tried to clean the inside of the car, but it was not so easy that they eventually had to abandon the task. They pushed the car into a pond. It did not sink, so they had to pull out the corpse and bury it. According to the correspondence, the couple had originally planned to flee to another state but then abandoned this idea because they would automatically become the main suspects. But that did not help them at all on the night of the murder. Jamie's father, named David, was not suspected. The man had sleep problems and took sleeping pills to sleep. Since he was not expecting anyone and could rest, David slept through the night and did not realize that his wife had been murdered by her own daughter. The man learned about the massacre on March 15 when Cheryl's corpse was found and identified by a patrol. He had no idea that he could himself have been a victim of the perpetrators. Caleb and Jamie were arrested and charged with murder and evidence tampering. Initially, it was assumed that the attacker was a soldier. It was thought that a daughter would hardly be able to handle an adult. But the man had no defensive wounds on his face or body, only a cut on his arm. As it turned out, he was sitting in the back seat, making it harder for him to hit the victim's neck. According to the medical examiner, Cheryl was hit from the right side. The image matched the wounds inflicted by the passenger in the passenger seat where the victim's daughter, Jamie, was sitting. The girl had a broken fingernail, and all her hands and face were heavily scratched. Obviously, the friend could have played a much smaller role in the attack than investigators had initially assumed, and Jamie had played a larger role in the murder. All these questions could only be clarified through interrogations. In his conversations with the police officers, Caleb made confusing and contradictory statements. Initially, the friend stated that he did not know what could have happened to Cheryl, but when investigators revealed what they knew about their joint trip, Caleb changed his story. He now admitted that all three were indeed at the festival, and that Cheryl then picked them up in her car and drove them home. Caleb was supposedly dropped off in front of his house. He did not notice anything suspicious and simply went to bed. He did not realize that a trip to the festival could end with a murder. He believed that his girlfriend would not commit such a thing. So everything was done by a stranger. Caleb insisted on his innocence and clearly covered the girl. Then, when he found out that their correspondence with Jamie had been uncovered, he began to shift all responsibility for the crime onto her. He said he had left Jamie and her mother in the car and went for a walk, and when he returned, he found the lifeless body of the woman and his girlfriend covered in blood. He claimed he had helped dispose of the corpse but was not involved in the crime himself. Jamie also initially claimed she had no idea who could have killed her mother, but her story changed several times during the interrogation. The student reported that her mother had driven her to Caleb and then left. During the interrogations, the girl cried a lot and said that she loved her mother very much, but it all turned out to be a lie. Given the collected evidence, it was obvious that she was the one who had stabbed her mother. At the time of her arrest, Jamie had not even had time to heal the injuries she had sustained during the fight, which was a clear indication of her guilt. But she refused to admit her involvement and simply made up various excuses. At the crime scene, a knife was found about 10 meters from the corpse of the murdered woman, which had been thrown away. It was the murder weapon. The forensic technicians found the DNA of 2 people on the blade, Cheryl's blood on the blade and Jamie's fingerprints on the handle. This confirmed that the daughter had inflicted the wounds and had become the executioner of her own mother. According to the prosecution, the woman wanted to use the trip to the festival to approach the young people and calmly talk about their relationship. She wanted to make things right and protect her daughter from the mistakes of her youth, not realizing that she was already sentenced to death at that moment. The investigators continued to examine the content of the couple's phones in custody. As expected, Jamie, the initiator of the events, was even more involved. The girl was not willing to stop there. In one of the dialogues, she insisted that it was worth getting rid of not only her mother, but also her father, who was also against their relationship and would hinder her happiness. Without knowing it herself, Jamie's beloved father was in deadly danger of being at the mercy of his own daughter. He learned about the planned plot, although he was also on the victim list, but the father refused to believe it. The man tried until the end to defend his daughter. He especially criticized the U.S. law enforcement and justice system because Jamie was to be tried as an adult criminal. The father believed that his daughter, even if she was involved in the murder, due to her age, did not know what she was doing. He insisted on a specialized juvenile detention center, as this would allow for the girl's future rehabilitation. Since his persuasion did not bear fruit with the police officers, he insisted that Jamie needed a psychiatric evaluation because she might be suffering from mental issues. The examination was conducted, and the experts found that Jamie was healthy. Again, the father criticized the media, which he believed had turned his daughter into a real monster. The man emphasized that she could neither be the ringleader nor the organizer of the murder. In his opinion, the guilt clearly lay with Caleb. Despite the father's efforts, his plan did not work, and all appeals were rejected. Jamie was to be tried as an adult in court. Had the father's efforts succeeded, she would have been placed in a juvenile detention center until she turned 21 and then released. Now she was facing a life sentence. It was decided to conduct separate proceedings for each of the accused in this case. The forensic expert who attended the trial provided an official report on the main circumstances of Cheryl's death. According to the expert, the massacre of the woman lasted about 20 minutes before she showed no signs of life. The woman lost consciousness due to her injuries and then died from blood loss. However, it was extremely difficult to determine exactly what role the 2 young people played in this execution. Obviously, the knife was in Jamie's hands, but Caleb probably was not excluded. Presumably, he helped his girlfriend by holding the victim from behind and probably strangled her, but no traces of his DNA were found on the victim's body. Also, despite the cut on his hand, it was assumed that he might have acted cautiously. The student and her friend still refused to confess or talk about the events in the car. An important witness for the prosecution was Jamie's best friend. A week before the murder, she had been in contact with the accused. Jamie told her about her worries. She believed that her mother did not understand her, and the girl was afraid of losing her friend. Jamie even said that she had planned the murder of her own mother together with Caleb, and was worried about the success of this plan. According to Jamie, they had initially decided that Caleb should reprimand Cheryl. Considering his age, this was risky, because the young man would certainly go to prison for the rest of his life, if caught. After a discussion, it was decided that the knife should be placed in the hands of the victim's daughter. The young criminals were sure that this would allow her to escape punishment due to the girl's young age. She would simply get away with it. Unfortunately, the friend simply did not believe these words and did not go to the police. When there was another conversation with the friend, the couple was just in the process of selecting a way to retaliate. The friend did not believe her ears, so she asked again. Apparently embarrassed, Jamie replied that she had only made a bad joke so that the friend was not alarmed. Later, shocking new details emerged. At least 4 people in the neighborhood of the Cream family heard a broken car horn around 1 a.m. At that time, Cheryl's car was parked in the driveway in front of the house. For 20 minutes, a suspicious noise could be heard from the vehicle, then it stopped, and the car immediately drove away. Thanks to the statements of these witnesses, investigators were able to reconstruct the alleged brutal murder more accurately. The timing matched the report of the medical examiner. It turned out that the woman was not killed near the pond where the corpse was buried, and the car was abandoned but directly in front of her own house. Unfortunately, none of the neighbors were vigilant and did not scare off the criminals. At that time, the family's father was sleeping deeply under the influence of sleeping pills, so that he could not hear anything or help his wife, but that saved his life. As Cheryl stopped breathing, the 14-year-old daughter and the 20-year-old friend drove away and placed the corpse in the back seat. Their plan to drown the car with the corpse did not work, so they had to get away. They dug out the corpse and disposed of the car there. After that, the bloodthirsty couple, as if nothing had happened, went to a fast food restaurant where they ate calmly. After a trip to the supermarket to buy cleaning agents, the couple returned to the car but were overwhelmed by this mission as well. After a quick cleaning of the interior, they fled. If the vehicle had not gotten stuck in the mud, events could have unfolded very differently. The corpse would have been sought for a long time, and perhaps Jamie's father would have lost his life as well. After another meeting with the prosecution before the trial, Jamie decided to plead guilty to first-degree murder, criminal conspiracy, and evidence manipulation. In fact, there was enough evidence against the girl, and it made no sense to deny it. According to the student, the motive was Cheryl's prohibition of communication and meetings with her friend. Naturally, the woman wanted the best for her daughter, but she signed her own death sentence when she threatened to go to the police if Caleb did not leave her alone. Jamie was afraid that Caleb would go to jail if Cheryl found out that she was pregnant. Eventually, the young people decided that murder was the only way out. After she confessed, the 14-year-old Jamie was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 35 years in prison. She will have the opportunity to leave prison at the age of 49, making her only 5 years younger than her own mother, whose life was brutally cut short. Now the trial against Caleb was next. The charges included child abuse, murder, and attempting to confuse the investigations. His lawyer decided to take advantage of the verdict already imposed on Jamie. In this way, Caleb silently shifted the responsibility for the murder onto the girl and declared himself willing to take responsibility for complicity and hiding the corpse. Another important trump for the defense was the fact that the girl was pregnant. According to him, the mother had caught them having sex in the car and had freaked out. The man knew that Jamie was pregnant with his child, so when a scuffle broke out between the women, he tried to protect his child's mother. He justified the presence of wounds on his own hands as he tried to separate the women, cutting Jamie himself accidentally with a knife, but then withdrawing the blow and killing no one. Throughout the trial, Caleb remained calm and even often smiled as he told his story. This version differed significantly from what the investigators had heard during the initial interrogations. The actual picture of the events that took place in the car still raises questions, as no traces of Caleb's DNA were found on the murder weapon or on Cheryl's corpse. The prosecution relied on a single accusation that indicated the young man's involvement in the murder of the woman. From the correspondence with Jamie, it emerged that Caleb also wanted her mother's death, mainly because he feared the woman would go to the police. In his case, the friend had a strong motive. At this point, the teenagers already knew that the girl was pregnant, which only worsened the situation. As evidence, the correspondence of the couple was presented to the jurors, especially Caleb's message, "I chose the knife," which demonstrated the seriousness of his intentions. These arguments proved to be convincing. Caleb Barnes was found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, hiding a corpse, and seducing a minor. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole plus 44 years for the other charges. In 2003, the case changed again. Now, Jamie's lawyer applied for a retrial. The defense accused the law enforcement authorities of inadequate investigations, as the investigators had overlooked evidence in defense of the young criminal. It was assumed that Jamie, due to her unstable condition at the time of the act, had been influenced by her delicate situation. Now, a new version of events emerged. According to Jamie, Caleb was the mastermind behind the murder. He was the one who instigated the girl to commit the murder. The defendant insisted that the friend was a strong manipulator, but had long resisted being persuaded. Then he resorted to physical violence, insisting that she became a victim of the friend who literally forced her to stab her mother. According to the defense, this sounded convincing because it involved an inexperienced 14-year-old student who got involved with a 20-year-old man, and even became pregnant by him. Given the circumstances, the girl could indeed have been driven and influenced by her friend. Now that he was in prison, she wanted to seek justice. But her new story is contradicted by the correspondence with the friend in which the girl herself actively insisted on the necessity of getting rid of her mother. There is still no final decision on the revision of these cases. In any case, Jamie became the youngest girl convicted in Lehigh County. Thank you for watching and take care of yourself. Even in the most peaceful places, there is a sinister creature that knows neither sympathy nor mercy. Apparently, the perpetrator in today's story had been waiting for his moment in the restricted area for a long time. How else could one explain his atrocity, which was committed on the very first morning after the lifting of restrictions? Denmark is a country known for its low crime rate. Nevertheless, not too long ago, there was an incident that not only threw the state, but the entire global community into turmoil. February 5, 2022, was the first Saturday on which Denmark lifted the restrictions that had been in place during the lockdown due to the pandemic. Everyone felt a great sense of relief, especially the young people who had been unable to connect or meet each other for so long. Mia Skadwij Steven was one of them. She and her friends looked forward to the first parties. Finally, they could meet everyone they hadn't seen in so long and reconnect. Mia had another reason as well. She wanted to celebrate an important event in her life because she had just finished her school year. For Mia, it meant that she was one step closer to fulfilling her dream. All of this took place in Aalborg, a fairly large and colorful city in Denmark, home to many students. The population numbers around 120,000 people. Late in the evening of February 5, 2022, some 2,000 young people gathered and filled bars and clubs that had been closed until then. It was cold outside, so everyone dressed warmly. That day, Mia wore dark clothing except for her white sneakers. She looked stylish but not really weather appropriate. However, she expected to get home without any problem by car with her friends. The crowd was gathered. The young people wanted to have fun and enjoy the weekend. Together with other students, Mia made her way to the party. The group spent several hours there, then moved from one night spot to the next until they finally ended up at a club. A friend who accompanied Mia that evening noticed that she was in a very exuberant mood, danced a lot, even with strangers, and could not stop. She had had quite a bit to drink and wanted to keep having fun, even though it was almost time for the club to close. Around 6 a.m. it was time to leave, and everyone quickly dispersed. Many had gone home much earlier than Mia, and there was no one who had abandoned her. Besides, she had no money and could not order a taxi. At the party, she had met a young man who was 22 years old and also from Aalborg. After the club closed, the man waited outside for her. The young man chatted for a while with Mia and her girlfriends before they all decided to go home. Mia planned to take the bus and wanted to meet up with her friends in the afternoon. A few hours had passed since Mia had said goodbye to her friends on the street. She wanted to get home, but she never showed up. All this worried her family more and more. However, they did not rush to contact the police, as this was the first long-awaited party after the lockdown, and they assumed she might simply have lost her way, perhaps gone to friends or her boyfriend. When, however, the young man received a call, he admitted that he had not seen his girlfriend all day and that she had ignored his attempts to contact her. By noon, Mia's mother called all of her friends. She was now in a panic since no one had seen the student since she left the club, and no one had been able to reach her. Although Mia was responsible and always stayed in touch, calling back if she was ever held up somewhere, what had happened worried her parents more and more. Her mother was frightened to death. As it turned out, Mia had last been seen at 6 a.m., and since then no one could say where she went or where she was. In light of this, the relatives decided to report her disappearance to the police. Even though it involved a party and a young woman who had been drinking, the police fortunately responded immediately and began searching. Unfortunately, there was simply no information to help guide the direction of the investigation. Mia's family also did not remain idle. Her father drove around in the car. Her mother and sister posted an appeal on social networks asking anyone with information for help. Photos and descriptions of Mia, including her clothing, were actively circulated. Since such cases are very rare in Denmark, the entire local community rallied around the Stev family. People actively shared posts and information and tried to spread them everywhere. At the same time, the police continued their investigations. The investigators took the accusations very seriously, which gave hope for a quick breakthrough. Despite Denmark's low crime rate, the investigators considered this incident a worst-case scenario and acted as quickly as possible. In view of the potential risks, the investigators immediately got to work. Initially, the goal was to obtain information about the incident, which was still lacking. To this end, all residents who were in the area around the time of Mia's disappearance were asked to hand over any possible materials, especially photos and videos from cell phones on which she might be seen during the party. Naturally, they also checked surveillance videos from all nearby shops and facilities. The situation was complicated by the fact that it was a very busy district with many clubs and bars that were packed to the brim. It was difficult to track down one particular person. The police also spoke to the man Mia had met that night, who had been one of the last people to talk to her. However, he had a confirmed alibi. He had left the place immediately by taxi. The residents responded eagerly to the request for help. The station received about 400 calls from citizens wanting to show their footage. Witnesses provided thousands of files recorded during the night and morning at surrounding parties. Thus, law enforcement officers had hundreds of hours of video material to review carefully. The task was enormous, and the investigators needed several days to complete it. The entire city seemed united in an effort to free Mia from an unknown fate. Family and friends feared that she might have simply frozen to death, but that seemed unlikely. She was nowhere to be found on the streets. Even after reviewing the first videos, the investigators found nothing suspicious. The friends' statements were fully confirmed. Mia had indeed left the club after closing time, around 6 a.m., chatted a bit with friends, and then probably headed to the bus stop. At the same time, investigators checked Mia's background in the hope that the young woman's biography would provide clues and guidance for their search. Mia was a nice and active woman, 22 years old at the time of her disappearance. Her family described her as intelligent and energetic. She dreamed of helping people. Since 2016, Mia had studied at the medical faculty of the country's largest university, Aalborg University, and was close to graduating. She was also an aspiring model and had participated in several photo shoots. It seemed there was nothing unusual in this short biography that could lead to tragedy. She had no ties to crime, took no illegal substances, and suffered from no mental illness, nor were there any suspicious people in Mia's circle. The meeting that fateful evening took place among her loved ones, although they had noticed that Mia's behavior was unusual. She had drunk too much and behaved somewhat presumptuously, dancing with many strangers. She was very attractive. Could this have prompted a potentially dangerous man to attack her, seeing her as easy prey? By February 7, 2022, more than 24 hours had passed since her disappearance. During this time, law enforcement again appealed to the public, asking possible eyewitnesses for valuable clues to help find the missing woman. The officers continued to examine the party footage, which kept coming in at a steady pace, requiring a lot of resources. All the young men Mia had met that night in her circle of friends and acquaintances were taken to the station and questioned. The investigators did not consider them suspects, but they needed to question witnesses. Later, everyone close to the young woman ended up at the station. Unfortunately, this did not advance the investigation. On the night of the same day, however, investigators noticed something unusual on footage from one of the surveillance cameras. At exactly 6:09 a.m. on February 6th, Mia approached a bus stop about 300 meters from the club. She was probably waiting for a bus to go home. A black car approached her, but at first she did not get in. After talking to the driver, she continued to wait for the bus, and he drove off. Still, no bus arrived, and even an hour and a half later, at 7:35 a.m., she was still standing on the street. She was obviously cold because she was not dressed for the weather. Naturally, she was quite desperate, having to wait for the bus and not knowing what to do. During this time, the same black car approached her again. She did not try to stop it. Instead, the driver slowed down on his own. There was another conversation between them, and after that, Mia got into the car. When the family learned of this, they called the situation absurd, because friends and relatives knew Mia as a principled person who would never get into a stranger's car. Apparently, she decided to make an exception out of desperation. The driver, presumably aroused no suspicion, managed to make her feel comfortable and gained her trust. The police considered that it might have been an acquaintance or an illegal taxi. The officers viewed the entire recording but could neither clearly read the license plate nor identify the driver's face, as the footage was of poor quality. Thus, it was not clear whose car she had gotten into. But it was obvious that the driver was the last known person to have seen Mia alive and unharmed. This driver had to be found and questioned. On February 8th, it was decided to again ask the public for help. The police hoped that people who knew the driver of the car would come forward. Several leads came in that had to be followed up. The investigators also spoke again with Mia's friends to clarify the timelines. The young students described how each of them had gotten home after a brief interaction in the parking lot around 6:02 a.m. The friend who had accompanied Mia to the bus stop described the route Mia took. This led to a result. The investigators were able to locate further video footage of Mia and the car that had stopped. Reviewing it led to a real breakthrough. It was found that the vehicle had unusual license plates painted in more than 2 colors. In addition, the recordings were of higher quality, so all symbols on the plate could be considered. This enabled a faster identification of the owner, the suspected kidnapper. On February 9, 2022, they managed to identify the owner of this car. The unknown man lived in a house just a few streets away from the club. When the investigators arrived at the address, they found the car, a black 2015 Volkswagen Golf. It was the exact same car that appeared on the security videos. The investigators managed to locate 2 men, both childhood friends who seemed connected to the vehicle. They were already known for minor offenses, including an incident in which they posed as police officers at a soccer match. Both denied any connection to Mia's disappearance. However, they certainly knew something, since they had access to the vehicle. Under Danish law, they were brought before a judge within 24 hours for a hearing, which essentially serves as a preliminary court proceeding that must take place within 24 hours of arrest. In this process, the prosecutor presents arguments and shows the collected material. Then the judge reviews the evidence and decides whether the detainees should remain in custody or be released. In this way, The law protects the rights of the accused while ensuring public safety when a person is considered potentially dangerous. On February 10, 2022, 4 days had passed since the young woman's disappearance. No one had provided a clue to her whereabouts, and no one had demanded a ransom. The chances of finding Mia alive decreased by the minute, even though family and friends continued to hope that she was doing well. The police did not jump to conclusions but were aware that the chances of saving Mia were practically zero. A preliminary hearing for the detainees took place before the district court, closed to the public. It was decided to release one of the men. This did not mean he was no longer suspected of the crime, but he was not considered a danger to society. The evidence against him was not sufficient to justify continued detention. Moreover, the man had a confirmed alibi. The case of the 36-year-old electrician named Thomas Thompson was completely different. He even agreed to be held in custody for 4 weeks. During this time, investigators actively reviewed the suspect's background and spoke to acquaintances of the detainee. Thomas was born on June 18, 1985, grew up in Southeast Asia, but later moved to a small town in Denmark with only about 500 inhabitants. He initially lived in an apartment and later moved to his grandparents' farm. He pursued a military career and rose to the rank of non-commissioned officer. After ending his service, he trained as an electrician. He was described as a skilled professional, polite, quiet, and a fairly nice man, though a bit withdrawn and reserved. He had a dark side. Before the incident with Mia, however, Thomas had not been violent. He neither drank alcohol nor took illegal substances. During his time in the military, he held a responsible position and trained in martial arts. Thomas even received a certificate confirming his first aid skills. The main reason for his arrest was the fact that it was Thomas's black Volkswagen registered to him. Moreover, the main suspect had no confirmed alibi. It was suspected that he picked Mia up at the bus stop and then disappeared with her. To confirm these speculations, more information was needed. The investigators first checked the car's GPS system when they seized the suspect's vehicle. It turned out that about 4 hours before he met the missing woman at the bus stop, he had tried to disable it. This was obviously done deliberately. A special digital forensic team managed to determine the vehicle's exact route from camera recordings. It started from Thompson's residence. Then he drove several times around the city, picked up Mia, and finally left the city. Thomas drove through several nearby communities with short stops before heading into a forested area several kilometers away. He remained there for a few hours and reappeared 2 days later. This part of the route seemed the most suspicious. The investigators decided to search it with specially trained dogs. They quickly found a hairband, clothing, underwear, and other items scattered at short distances from each other. Their placement resembled a straight line, and it seemed as if the owner of these items had run through the forest, fallen, or been attacked, gradually losing these belongings. The dogs led the officers deep into the forest near a local village, where they found several spots of disturbed earth. They had obviously been dug up shortly before the events. Under a thin layer of soil were human remains, dismembered and very finely chopped. In total, 231 body parts were found, most of which were scattered in the grave. But that was not all. Some of the remains could not be found, presumably belonging to Mia, since the clothing resembled what the missing woman had worn that evening. All physical evidence was collected and sent to the laboratory. Quite quickly, the medical examiner confirmed that they had found Mia's remains. Due to their condition, however, it was difficult to determine the cause of death and the injuries inflicted. On February 10th, a press conference was held at which the law enforcement authorities decided to inform the public about the discovered information. They announced that Mia was dead and that the suspected murderer had been arrested. The investigators promised to continue the investigation until it reached a successful conclusion. According to the medical examiner, the cause of death was strangulation. The body had been cut into pieces with an electric saw. Most of the remains were badly damaged, as they had presumably been exposed to a strong alkali solution for a long time. On the night Mia disappeared, Thomas turned off his car's GPS at 2:14 a.m. However, There was a technical malfunction, so the location continued to be recorded every 15 seconds. When asked why he had tried to turn off the tracking system, the man claimed it was because of a police officer who allegedly had a grudge against him and harassed him at every opportunity. The suspect, however, told many such stories, becoming even more detailed after each episode. The GPS was turned on again by Thomas at 9:23 a.m., presumably by which time the massacre of Mia was already complete. The murderer brought the body to his house, where he dismembered it. The main suspect could be questioned and admitted that he had indeed picked Mia up in his car. The man said he had simply passed a bus stop and seen a frozen woman who was not dressed appropriately for the weather. Thomas offered her a free ride home because he wanted to do a good deed. According to the man, Mia flirted with him in the car and acted as if she was in no hurry, so the suspect offered to take her along, and she agreed. The two drove to various places and then into a wooded area. According to the suspect, Mia and Thomas had consensual intercourse there. At some point, however, Mia supposedly had a seizure. Thomas claimed she accidentally fell and broke her neck, resulting in death. Later, he changed his statement significantly. Thomas claimed that maybe the strap of her bag pressing against her neck could have strangled her, which he also considered an accident. From then on, the main suspect's story changed with every conversation with the investigators. Suddenly, he claimed Mia had gotten out of the car and tried to run away, then stumbled, fell, and was fatally injured. In any case, when she no longer showed any signs of life, Thomas panicked and didn't know what to do. He did not call for emergency services because he feared being charged with murder. The man had already had trouble with the law and feared that the situation would only get worse. So Thomas couldn't think of anything better than to take the body to his home and try to get rid of it. At first, he wanted to dissolve the body, but after almost 24 hours in a chemical concentrate, the desired result could not be achieved. Then he dismembered the remains into pieces, buried most of them, and scattered some of the smaller parts over the burial site. He also tried to burn the clothes he wore on the day of the murder, as well as the victim's floor mat and bag, which might have had bloodstains. Fragments of clothing and tools that might have been used during the massacre were found in the ashes. Thomas insisted that the incident was an accident, and that he had disposed of the body out of fear. However, the investigators disagreed, as such a sophisticated method of disposing of the body spoke volumes. It seemed that only a madman could be capable of such cruelty. The investigators believed that Thomas had offered Mia a ride home with malicious intent. Evidence of his premeditation was his attempt to turn off the GPS, which possibly failed and helped investigators reconstruct his route. Furthermore, Thomas's persistence worked against him, since he managed to get Mia into the car only on the second attempt. He waited an hour and a half for the right moment when she was finally freezing and desperate enough to agree to get into the car. As soon as Mia got in, Thomas began threatening her, probably with a weapon, intimidating her and then raping her. Afterward, he decided to get rid of her so she could not report him to the police. But he chose a cruel way to do this. The most likely cause of death, according to the medical examiner, was strangulation. In fact, a significant portion of the body parts were never recovered. Perhaps they contained even more gruesome secrets of the perpetrator. Since Mia had obviously tried to escape her rapist, which ruled out the possibility of consensual intimacy, the fact of the assault seemed indisputable, and the murder was the result of her desperate resistance. The rape was indirectly confirmed. Posthumous desecration of the body could not be ruled out, but it was impossible to prove given the condition of the remains. The perpetrator stubbornly kept silent and refused to provide details. The prosecutor explained that the defendant had picked up the woman because he wanted to have sex with her. It was by no means an act of kindness. According to the prosecution, Thomas hunted all night, looking for a suitable victim and waiting for the moment to trap her. The fact that Mia desperately tried to escape was proven by the same GPS data analysis. Law enforcement authorities determined that Thomas stopped 3 times in a wooded area. He probably chased his victim with the car, or she ran out several times, but the perpetrator managed to catch her and pull her back inside. The perpetrator's vehicle was checked. DNA samples from the victim were found on the passenger seat, and a search of the suspect's apartment also revealed blood traces of the murdered victim. This confirmed that the murderer had brought the victim's body into his home afterward. Thomas's behavior was analyzed, and the presumed time of the attempt to dispose of the body was investigated. The man led a normal life except for taking one day off work. He spent that day shredding his victim's remains, all while calmly meeting with friends and acquaintances and ordering pizza and other foods, including many sweets. The perpetrator seemed to feel no remorse whatsoever. The victim's family called his statements that Mia might have voluntarily agreed to sex with a stranger a gross lie and a disrespect to the memory of the young woman. The investigation also revealed that Thomas might have had more severe disorders than previously assumed. It turned out that in 2019 he was caught stalking a schoolgirl. Similar incidents occurred in 2015 and 2016, when he peered into the windows of two other girls and behaved inappropriately. One of the victims said that one night she heard a knocking at her window, and when she went there, she saw a stranger standing in the pouring rain with his pants down and empty eyes. He was pleasuring himself, ignoring completely that he was being watched. The girl immediately woke her parents, and Thomas fled, but the police were called and made a composite sketch of the intruder. In 2010, an even more disturbing incident occurred. 3 women woke up in their apartment to find a man inside. He grabbed one of the women and raped her but managed to escape. The police were called to the scene but could not catch the perpetrator. Due to lack of evidence and the statute of limitations, the suspect could not be prosecuted for these incidents. However, the victims could be used as witnesses to complete the picture of the perpetrator. Thomas's ex-girlfriends also described disturbing traits in his behavior. In their view, he became arrogant and manipulative soon after the relationship began. He demanded unconditional obedience and easily lost his temper at the slightest insubordination. One of the women said that after their breakup, her car's brake hoses were suddenly cut. Fortunately, this did not lead to tragedy, but it was impossible to prove the ex's involvement. She was sure Thomas had done it. Another woman recounted how he tied her naked to the radiator and raped her. A third witness found a file on his computer with a long list of women and a chart of their menstrual cycles, which also seemed very suspicious. Several colleagues testified at trial that Thomas enjoyed watching extremely brutal videos in which people were actually killed and women raped, with all the gruesome details. Even then, his colleagues considered him insane. Psychiatrists who analyzed his condition believed that the defendant had narcissistic and dissocial personality traits. He was a sociopath with no empathy for others. Despite the extensive evidence presented by the prosecution, the perpetrator never pleaded guilty to raping and murdering Mia, nor did he show remorse. However, he was willing to admit guilt for the improper treatment of the body and for dismembering it. The man denied any involvement in the murder and claimed Mia had died in an accident. This was unconvincing. Even if Mia had been accidentally fatally injured, he could have called for help, and the forensic examination would have confirmed his innocence. Instead, Thomas chose to dismember her without administering first aid, though he knew all the techniques. Had he only been found guilty of improper handling of a corpse, he would have received only a 6-month prison sentence. In June 2023, 38-year-old Thomas Thompson was found guilty of murdering Mia Skadwij-Stev. He was also found guilty of severe abuse of a corpse. However, he was acquitted of rape due to lack of evidence. The prosecution demanded a life sentence, while the murderer's attorney argued for 16 years in prison. Thomas was sentenced to life imprisonment because he was considered a danger to others. He can be released on parole after 10 years. In practice, offenders with this type of sentence usually remain behind bars for a little more than 13 years on average. This crime alarmed the public so much that a volunteer organization was founded, whose main goal is to ensure the safety of young people who could become victims of a murderer prowling the city streets. The organization's main initiative is to install a large number of surveillance cameras on the streets. Thanks for watching and take care of yourself. Do you know, modern technology has definitely improved our lives. We have the entire diversity of the world before us, all that knowledge available at the press of a button, but all this diversity also has a downside. The age of information technology has accelerated the exchange of information and driven technological progress. The World Wide Web can be used to gather information, plan, and commit crimes, and today's history proves exactly that. This story was one of the first crime stories related to the internet. Christina Long was born on March 17, 1989, in the small town of Fairfield, Connecticut, USA. The first years of her life were not easy and bright, but the end of this fate was even more tragic. The girl moved shortly before the events in question in 2001 to her Aunt Shelley. The reason for this were serious problems in her family. The girl's mother suffered from an addiction that was related to the years-long use of illegal substances. In the years leading up to her daughter's departure, the woman had repeatedly struggled with various problems. Her life was gradually going downhill. She regularly consumed heavy illegal substances and did not care at all about her child. The worst was that the girl had observed her mother's condition deteriorate for many years and also suffered from all the associated problems. The house in which the girl lived became a real brothel. Different men kept coming here, from whom the mother bought illegal substances. The woman was too preoccupied with her addiction to take care of the girl. Christina was left to her own devices, which affected her daily activities and her school performance. The teachers complained to the principal, and his staff came to the call and found the woman in a frightening state, but the girl was fortunately normal. She continued to learn and do normal teenage things, even though it was difficult for her. Unlike her mother, she was not addicted to drugs. The social services decided to remove the student from the family and place her with another family member who was best suited for this task. Initially, the social workers examined the child's father, but the situation with him was not much better than with the biological mother. Their marriage began like a real dream, but only 2 years after the birth of the girl, the Long family broke up. The biological father decided not to start a family and began to lead a dissolute lifestyle. Women circulated in a continuous stream. He neither cared for his daughter nor for his former wife, who was suffering from severe addictions. Naturally, he was not the right person to obtain custody of a 12-year-old girl. Finally, it was decided that this environment was too dangerous and aggressive for the child. It was decided to take Christina away and find a good family. The choice fell on an aunt named Shelley Ryan. She proved to be the only caring person who sincerely wanted to help the girl and take her under her wing. She was 51 years old at that time. Christina's relative was a sales representative. For several years, she had been horrified by what was happening to her family and the life of her own sister. If she couldn't save her sister from addiction, she still considered it her duty to help her. She had always loved Christina and couldn't allow her to be raised by strangers. She was kind and wealthy enough to secure a future for herself and the schoolgirl, so the girl moved to the cozy suburb of Danbury, Connecticut, finally finding the child in conditions that were not indifferent to her. Although her aunt had custody of her, she behaved like a real mother. They quickly found common ground and communicated closely with each other. Gradually, Christina began to forget the corners of life with an addicted mother, where a different dealer came every day. It is noteworthy that her biological mother did not hesitate to use her body to finance her addiction, and all of this was witnessed by her daughter. In September 1989, Shelley enrolled the girl in a public school, one of the best educational institutions in the city, expensive and prestigious. However, the woman did not worry about the costs. She only wanted the best for Christina. Shelley had worked hard her entire life. She had built a career and achieved excellent performance in her profession. One of the reasons she decided to send her child to a public school was the higher level of safety compared to municipal facilities. The woman feared that Christina would be exposed to another hostile environment, but she wanted to improve the girl's life. It is logical that a public school, which is usually attended by children of wealthier, more respected parents, offers a higher level of safety, and higher standards should also be applied to the students themselves. After all, Shelley not only wanted to keep her away from all the outcasts and bad people who constantly swirled through her life because of her mother, but she also wanted to improve the girl's life. Christina quickly made friends at her new school. The girl was sweet, friendly, and likable. Thanks to Shelley, other good qualities also began to develop in her, which had been suppressed by the years of indifference from her biological parents, who had turned their attention to the girl's success since they lived with their aunt. Christina had recovered after so many years of tyranny and the horrors of the brothel that her mother had organized in her own house. The girl fit perfectly into the new team, literally from the first days. Friendships were made, she became a cheerleader, and even took over the position of captain. In addition to her successes, she became increasingly sad. Shelley decided to find out what was depressing the teenager. According to Christina, all the children at the public school already had their own computers. They used the internet and learned to handle the PC. The young Long also asked her aunt for a computer. Christina longed for her family despite the years of indifference she had felt. She had no intention of getting in touch with them. She realized that she had absolutely no interest in her mother and her father, but she desperately wanted to communicate with her older sister Kosa, who was 19 years old and living in Japan. Furthermore, Christina believed that it would greatly help her education, as with the help of the internet, one could immediately get all the information needed for studying. Ultimately, this argument was decisive for the purchase. Shelley gave her niece a computer. Christina was happy and initially created an account to use the same chat rooms as her classmates. The student used a fictitious nickname instead of her real name but uploaded her real photos. However, she decided to lie about her age. At that time, she was 13, but the girl looked much older than her apparent age, even too old for a student. The girl wrote that she was already an adult when she finished her profile. On the same day, she was contacted by a man with the nickname Eclipso. They immediately began a conversation. The girl, inexperienced in the field of online communication, behaved in everyday life as quiet and friendly. It seemed that the student liked her new friend, so they quickly became friends. After Shelley bought a computer, she noticed that Christina was spending more and more time in virtual environments. The woman felt that the girl had disconnected from real life, and that worried her. The aunt was aware of the dangers of the internet, but had little idea how to deal with it. Shelley considered full control to be excessive. She repeatedly communicated with her niece, warning her about contact with strangers and similar things. In return, the girl reassured Shelley, saying that they did not communicate with strangers, shady people, arranged no acquaintances, and all contacts were accounts of other children from the public school. Shelley believed her. The woman often appeared curious but did not directly intrude into the teenager's private life. Instead, she simply went into her rooms and later looked over her shoulder at the screen and distracted her with usual questions. Every time she saw that the student was meeting with friends from the educational institution, she reassured herself again. In the meantime, Christina communicated more and more with the young man online. Their acquaintance began with the usual question, "How are you?" But it quickly turned into an exchange of ordinary photos. The girl feared that her partner would not want to continue communication if he found out how old she really was, so she convinced him that she was 16. Their communication became increasingly open. As later turned out, it soon reached a new level. One evening, Shelley noticed that Christina had locked herself in her room. She was apparently chatting on the internet, and her aunt suspected that something was wrong. She was still worried that the girl had isolated herself from real life. She seemed to spend all her free time on the internet. Christina was no longer interested in activities or meetings in real life, apart from walks to the local shopping center every Friday after practice. The woman feared that her warnings had not been heeded. That evening, Shelley knocked on the bedroom door. She was worried about her niece, but as always, Her aunt was reassured when Christina answered that she was chatting with her cheerleader friends. The student refused to open the door. In fact, Christina was writing an ennui with the person who had the nickname Eclipso and concealed this from everyone. As she was about to go to bed, the man wrote that he wanted to meet her in real life. The young man wrote that he would visit her on May 17, 2002. This message excited Christina enormously. The events were overwhelming for a young student. It was all new. She desperately wanted to meet this man, but she was aware that Shelley would be against such contact. The girl knew that her aunt was against communication with strangers on the internet. The woman had told her more than once how it could end. Of course, Christina had a different opinion. She was sure that everything would be fine, made plans, dreamed that this young man could become the love of her life, and told her friends about it. Indeed, people often find each other online, but there are also high risks. Behind a beautiful account, a cruel and dangerous man could hide, a real criminal who acts on the net and lures innocent victims into his dangerous traps. Christina was aware of this risk, but she followed her heart and decided to come to this meeting at any cost and meet Eclipso in person. She assumed that Christina would have cheerleader training on May 17. The girl had told Shelley in advance that she would go to the shopping center with some of her friends after practice to shop and chat. The woman gladly accepted the news because she had previously had concerns about the socialization problems that a teenager can have when she is completely immersed in virtual life, and was therefore glad that the girl was returning to real life. However, in reality, Christina wanted to meet acquaintances from the internet. The time of the fateful appointment was approaching, which turned out to be truly fateful for the girl. She anxiously awaited this day, while continuing to feign plans for the evening. The girl was not irritated that Eclipso never mentioned his real name and did not show his face in photos. He described himself as a sporty young man, a basketball player. Christina was herself a sporty girl who looked older than her years, and thanks to their shared interests, they quickly found a common basis. On the day of the meeting, a young man who introduced himself as Carlos Pozo called Shelley's house in the morning. The woman could not speak with him because the girl was at school at that time. Christina then participated in a training session and returned home to change clothes and prepare for a shopping trip. Shelley wanted to drop her off at the shopping center where her niece was supposed to meet her friends. She had often gone shopping with her classmates before, so her behavior was not suspicious. On the way there, Shai inquired about Carlos, and Christina told a short story about this young man. He was an athlete from a neighboring school. Christina admitted that they had met online and sometimes played together. First of all, the woman asked how old he was. According to Christina, he had recently turned 14 years old, but Christina said nothing about plans to meet. The aunt was concerned and expressed her doubts, but her niece reassured her and said that she would not meet anyone but only communicate with this friend in the game. She said that the student was not yet ready for a serious relationship due to her age. Shelley believed her, even though she was worried. She literally had a bad feeling about it. The woman saw that Christine looked older, like a 16 or 17-year-old girl, and was quite attractive, so the woman had legitimate concerns. Somehow, the student managed to convince her aunt and calm her down. In fact, Christina had already been sending photos to Eclipso almost daily at that time, including pictures with an open visor that showed the man's particular admiration for the man. Photos of the girl in cheerleader uniform. The young people began to flirt, and then open communication began with regular photos. In fact, the girl herself was already in a relationship at such a young age as it later turned out. She even already had a sex life, so flirting over the internet was casually accepted. Her aunt made Christina pick up at around 5:40 p.m. near the entrance to the center. Shelley tried to get her niece to accompany her because the woman suspected something and wanted to make sure that the girl was really going to meet her school friends. But when they arrived, Christina quickly jumped out of the car, pointed to a group of young people, and said they were her friends. The woman had no time to understand anything because she was standing on the street and behind her, a line of cars had already formed. She believed the girl and drove off, so Christina succeeded in deceiving Shelley again. The aunt called out to her that she would pick her up at 9 p.m. That was the time when the stores began to close, and she had always picked her up from there before. The girl tried to plead for at least another half hour and called Shelley to come back no earlier than 9:30 p.m. However, the woman remained persistent and answered that she would come on time. Shelley was slightly late and arrived at the shopping center at 9 p.m. But contrary to her expectations, Christine was not in the parking lot. The woman waited for a while and became slowly nervous. She called her niece several times on her mobile phone, but she ignored the calls. Then the woman left her car in the parking lot and turned to the shopping center's security. At this late hour, there were very few customers here, but Christine apparently had no intention of leaving. Shelley turned to the security staff and asked about the whereabouts of the student. She described the girl and said that she was supposedly out with friends. The security staff immediately responded to the appeal and began checking the information, reviewing the surveillance cameras, and searching everywhere for the student. But there was no one like Christina in the shopping center. The aunt stayed there until 10:45 p.m. and waited for her, but Christina was still missing. The woman called several times on her mobile phone, but the teenager ignored the calls again. Then, Shelley decided to notify the police. They responded immediately to the call since it was a minor. They arrived at the shopping center and began communicating with the security staff, checked cameras in stores that had not yet closed, but no one in the shopping center saw the missing person. At the same time, the police spoke with Shelley herself to find out what kind of relationship existed between the woman and the student, and whether Christina might have run away for some reason. The aunt said that the communication and understanding between mother and daughter were excellent. The girl suffered neither from psychological disorders nor from addictions. She was an exemplary student, a beauty, and an athlete with great hopes. The student led a normal teenage life, with the only difference that she spent a lot of time on the internet in the last month. In Shelley's view, Christina could not have run away. She had no reason to do so. The aunt then called several friends of the missing girl, with whom she was supposed to meet that evening. She contacted several girls and boys from the school. The woman was astonished because none of them admitted that they were supposed to meet Christina at the shopping center that day. Furthermore, they claimed that they had never gone shopping with the missing person. All the children were checked, and the statements of the teenagers were confirmed. After school, they returned home and did not go anywhere. One of the friends provided very valuable information. After the girl's confession, Christina had been actively corresponding with an unknown man on the internet for several months. She described him as a 14-year-old high school student who was sporty. A friend of the missing person confessed that Christina was supposed to meet him for the first time in real life that evening. This was a big shock for Shelley, as she had no idea about these plans to meet a stranger. The woman had repeatedly talked with Christina about the dangers of the World Wide Web. She believed that her niece had listened to her and would not do anything stupid. Her aunt had never tried to fully control the girl's online activities. She believed that the relationship between them should be based on trust and was afraid of hurting her niece. When this information fell into the hands of the investigators, the police officers immediately began to find out who this mysterious young man was, with whom the student disappeared after a meeting. The investigator involved in the search for the missing girl quickly found out that it was a man named Carlos Era, who was harassing Shelley. As far as he understood, it was, however, a much older man than the 14-year-old student he claimed to be. The investigator immediately reported his suspicion to his aunt, who only knew Christina's story. The aunt told about the incident that Carlos had called her, as well as the story of the high school girl about the SMS with the 14-year-old athlete. When the woman found out that it could be an adult, she was horrified and realized that all the horrors she had told Christina about and warned her about might have become reality. The investigators contacted Shelley to gain access to the girl's computer. As it turned out, her contact person had at that time changed her account name and also her photos. In addition, the messenger they had been corresponding through was password protected. Shelley realized that these security measures made no sense for normal communication with the young man. The police had to apply for access to the account from the messenger's administration. Although this was quite difficult, an investigator had already logged into Christina's chat with the man after 2 hours. What was discovered in the correspondences was a real blow for Shelley. It turned out that Christina was communicating with several unknown young men simultaneously, had open correspondence with all of them, willingly engaged in flirting, exchanged provocative photos, and had sex with several older men at the same time. With another young man she repeatedly met for intimate contacts. After the first meetings, he asked her several times about the delay, but the partners used protection, so there was no pregnancy and they continued to have sex. From the correspondences, it emerged that the young people had no intention of forming relationships and families, but simply wanted to have fun. Apparently, she did not reveal her true self to everyone. Some teenagers knew how old the student really was, while others thought she was an adult. While reviewing the girl's correspondence, the investigators noticed 3 suspect accounts. They decided to examine 2 of them more closely. For 2 of the accounts on social media, data was requested, which came back the next morning. At this point, 10 hours had already passed since Christina's disappearance. Due to the information requests, the police found out that Carlos was a 22-year-old young man whom she met for the first time that day. Of course, the young man became the main suspect. The investigators quickly found out where he lived and went directly to his address. Fortunately, Carlos was at home, and the officers began to question him. The young man behaved suspiciously but denied any connection to Christina or any correspondence with her. At the same time, he stuttered. The young man was very nervous and took a long time to choose his answers. He spoke confusedly. It was obvious that he was hiding something. When the officer asked about the young man's alibi, he literally trembled. According to the young man, he had spent the evening before at home. Despite the obvious signs of excitement, Carlos did not confess to his involvement in the disappearance of the student, so the police had to verify his words. The investigators were sure that one of their letters, probably from Carlos, had kidnapped her and was holding her captive with violence. She urgently needed to be found and rescued before she was harmed. At this point, Christina had been missing for over 18 hours. The police realized that the maximum time span for searching for a missing person, during which the probability of finding the person alive is greatest, is only 48 hours. Since Carlos had not confessed to the kidnapping, they had to check the second account that seemed suspicious. It was a man named Saul from Reese. What was suspicious about this man was his bandaged arm, which was obviously recently injured. According to the young man, he had broken it the night before with the hood of a car. The young man also claimed not to know Christina, even though they were in active contact. As the investigators knew, the police officers also felt that he was hiding something because Saul behaved very aggressively and made confusing statements, just like Carlos. Unfortunately, there was no physical evidence against him, so he had to be held until the circumstances were clarified. Notably, Saul was the same man with whom Christina had been regularly meeting for intimate encounters in recent months. The Friday shopping meetings with her high school friends were actually a cover-up, and were timed to coincide with the meetings in the car with Saul. Unfortunately, checking the 2 suspects did not bring the investigators any closer to finding the missing person as time passed. The police found out that Saul's parents lived in Brazil. On the second day, Saul was called in again for questioning. Under the pretext that he had lied during the first conversation with the police officers, he was shown the correspondence in which he was informed that the secret liaison with the student had been uncovered. The investigators began to ask suggestive questions, for example, about Christina's age, as she was a much younger girl. Even the fact that he had corresponded with her and exchanged explicit photos could be considered sexual harassment. The young man was therefore nervous, but the police suspected that he was involved in a much more serious offense. They applied several common techniques. They played the good cop and the bad cop and tried to catch him in unpleasant questions. Finally, Saul admitted that he had actually seen Christina on Friday evening. They walked through the shopping center and chatted animatedly. Then the man suggested that they leave her in his car in the parking lot in peace. She agreed, and the young man admitted that there were intimate contacts between them that were consensual. When the police asked about the age of the missing person, Saul said that he considered Christina to be of legal age, the age she had stated in her correspondence. He said what was confirmed by the police. This did not absolve the main suspect of her guilt. She was actually only 13, although she looked much older. She was colorful and dressed maturely. In any case, she did not look like she was an adult. Saul claimed that he did not know Christina's true age and complained that she had deceived him. Now the investigators had an argument with which they could finally break the perpetrator. However, the Brazilian man did not give up and believed that it was not his fault. According to him, the couple had separated immediately after the intimacy, but Christina wanted to meet another man. Saul simply went home. He had a family, a wife, and a child. He was an illegal immigrant. He worked in a restaurant. They lived in a house not far from the place where the meetings with the student took place. After this interrogation, the police's suspicion against this young man was confirmed. He could indeed have been the last person who saw Christina, but could it have been someone else? The police believed that Saul was lying, although the Brazilian man did not confess and continued with his arrest. 24 hours after the girl's disappearance, there was still no trace of her. The investigators went back to Carlos. They believed that the young man might also know something. It was not excluded that the girl had met with him after Saul. The main problem for Carlos was the fact that he knew that Christina was a minor. In the correspondence, Christina said she was 16. Still, the man also had correspondence, flirting, exchange of photos with the missing woman, including snapshots at the second meeting. With the police, the young man still stuttered in the same way. He seemed to be on the verge of panic, so the investigators tried to influence his unstable state, but he did not give up. 36 hours had passed since the disappearance, and there was still no word about Christina. The police had two suspects who both seemed to be in custody, and both were silent. Voluntary helpers and police officers had searched the town for 24 hours, but no trace of the missing person was found. At this point, FBI agents had already joined the investigation. They decided to subject both suspects to a lie detector test to find out if the young men knew what had happened to Christina. The lie detector showed that Carlos and Saul were lying. They both seemed suspicious. 40 hours after the disappearance, the Brazilian finally offered to bring Christina to the police officers. He took the investigators to his neighborhood, led them through two neighboring houses, and showed them the schoolgirl. Her corpse lay in a drainage pipe that ran behind the houses. The young man admitted that he had accidentally strangled her during sex. He claimed that he had consensual sex with her but had gone too far. The young man was simply confused and tried to release her. Unfortunately, that did not help. Instead of calling emergency services, he simply threw the corpse away in the hope of getting away with it. During the investigation, it turned out that Carlos had been intimate with Christina that same night, but not after Saul, rather before him. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison for his relationship with the minor. Saul Reyes pleaded not guilty on all charges. The prosecution found him guilty of second-degree murder, sexual coercion, and harassment of a minor. No one believed his story of accidental strangulation. It was suspected that Saul had learned that Christina had contact with another man before him and had strangled her out of jealousy. He was found guilty and sentenced to a 30-year prison term, which was suspended for 25 years on probation. This case became a much-noticed case as it was one of the first murders in history committed with the help of the internet. Serious discussions were held about the predators who could meet on the World Wide Web. Who was who? What surprises the future holds? My advice is not to get lost in the variety of new possibilities and to think about your own safety. Thank you for watching and take care of yourself.